Hello, my name is Etsko Skatema, and I'd like to take the opportunity to present to you the first step of what will become the Implats Leadership Development Framework. And this understanding of leadership is really rooted in our understanding of culture that we operate at Implats. And that view is really concerned with this idea that organizations only succeed when they make a contribution to the world that they're in. And we have almost an organic metaphor for that. We say that if you view the whole world as a body, then any enterprise that's in the world operates like an organ in a body, and clearly any organ serves to make a contribution to the rest of your body, to the body. So the liver, for example, doesn't exist for itself. It exists to make a contribution to the rest of the body. And we've got a couple of insights that we think help to cement this view of organization. The one is that clearly enterprises don't exist for themselves. I mean, they exist to make a contribution to customers and clients. And we can say that without fear of contradiction because supply exists to serve demand and not the other way around. Enterprises are a collaboration between owners and suppliers and employees in order to make a contribution to customers and clients. And when enterprises do that well, they have a right to exist. We have a very simple metaphor to help us to understand how organizations succeed, and it's a baking one. We assume we have 3 bakers who bake a cake. And it takes these bakers a whole month to bake this cake, and at the end of the month, the cake is sold, and each baker takes a slice home to feed their own family. And clearly the slice that's left, we would call a surplus. And that surplus is the measure of the success of the enterprise. And what that surplus is suggesting is that these 3 bakers have worked together in such a way that the total product that they baked was bigger than what each individual took home. In other words, it means that collectively, these people gave more than what they took. That intent to give more than what one takes translates, first of all, to a number of key behaviors that affect business excellence. Those key behaviors are really concerned with people pursuing operational excellence. In other words, they do things to do them well. They don't just do things to achieve a result. They also do things to make a contribution to their environment, and they're sensitive to the environment. They have a sense of financial acumen, so they're not wasteful. They know how to think long term. They know how to make a contribution to the world that they're in. They have good relationships with the people in the enterprise. And what we mean by this particularly is employee representatives, people like trade unions and other employee representative bodies. And finally, they're able to manage the requirements of all stakeholders. So they can manage the requirements and interests of employees, of owners, of suppliers in this process of being there to serve a customer or a client. This intent to serve then also translates into how peers in teams deal with each other. And so if one took a horizontal section through this organization, you'll be dealing with people in peer groups, in teams. And the metaphor that drives our understanding here is really a sporting one. I mean, if we looked at soccer as an example, if all the members of a soccer team were all trying to score at the same time, you'd basically have chaos on the field. What makes a successful team isn't that each individual is trying to score himself. In fact, most of the work that happens on the field in a good team isn't about somebody scoring. The team succeeds based on the degree to which people in the team are willing to set each other up to succeed, other people up to succeed. So it's the degree to which the team member is willing to set his colleague up to succeed rather than to compete with his colleague is the degree to which you have collaborative teams, people working together. So that means then that peer groups succeed when individuals collaborate and they fail when individuals compete. That the individual collaborates when he is there, when he intends to set his colleague up to succeed, and setting her colleague up to succeed means she is there to give rather than take from her colleague. The key behaviors that we think are concerned with team excellence is really the ability to establish trust with your colleagues, to manage conflict with your colleagues, to foster collaborative behavior, to build relationships with your colleagues, to embrace diversity, and finally to communicate effectively. The next issue that the intent to serve or give has to translate to is leadership or hierarchy. We understand leadership specifically being concerned with hierarchical relationships, people, if you like, being in charge of others. And what we already know is that hierarchies succeed when they solicit the willingness and loyalty of followers, and and followers only become willing if they see that the power of the boss is legitimate. In other words, they give the power the right to be in charge, rather than it just being an issue of them acquiescing to the boss. What this care and growth idea means is an inversion in the direction of service in the reporting relationship. In other words, subordinates aren't there for bosses. Bosses are there for subordinates. The boss doesn't use the people as he means to get a job done. He actually inverts that logic. He uses the job as his opportunity, as his means to grow the person. And again, we have a coaching metaphor. If the coach of a soccer team told the team that he was going to use the team as his resources to produce a result, the team will be very disgruntled with him because he's trying to take something from the team. But if the coach understood that it's actually the team's job, it's the player's job to produce a result, and the coach's job is to set the player up to succeed, it means that the coach uses the job that's being done as his means to empower the player. So he doesn't use the player as his means to get a job done. He uses the job as his means to enable the player. This inversion of the direction of service in the reporting relationship then would turn into the following key behaviors with regard to leadership excellence. First of all, the boss would care for people. Secondly, the boss would know how to define the contribution of somebody, particularly somebody in the hierarchy that is focused on the person's own contribution rather than the result that they're achieving. The boss would also know how to empower people or grow people. The boss would be willing to provide subordinates with the means to do what's required of them, and this includes things like the tools to do the job that's required of them, the resources they may need, the authority they may need, and so on. The boss understands how to establish accountability. The boss also is able to create a shared sense of value. In other words, what really is not negotiable for us in this team. And then finally, the boss has the kind of social intelligence to have some political acumen. In other words, he understands that an organization isn't a machine that produces a result. An organization is a community of people who collaborate to serve customers and clients, and the boss can intelligently manage or navigate the politics of that understanding. Finally, both these variables of leadership excellence and team excellence, if you like, intersect at the level of the individual, because every individual occupies a place both in a hierarchy and the individual occupies a place in a peer group. And in a sense, in both instances, we're telling the individual the same thing. We're telling the individual, be there to serve others rather than yourself. Be there to serve your subordinates. Be there to serve your peers. Now, many people would find this or could find this very challenging because it's, in a sense, people might interpret this as saying, cut your own throat. And our argument is that, in fact, when you are there to serve others, you aren't busy cutting your own throat. That's exactly when you establish what you really want from your life. I mean, in my experience, if you ask people what they want from life, what do they really aspire to? Whatever they say, you can place in 4 categories: security, fulfillment, power, and harmony. And our view is that those 4 categories of security, fulfillment, power, and harmony are actually the product of how your intent works. If you are there to serve others, if you give to other people, you create the conditions where they become allied to you. In other words, that's when you establish a sense of harmony with others. When you're there to care for and grow your subordinates, they become loyal to you. In other words, they're on your side, and you get a real sense of power because they're your allies. But also, if you base your sense of security and fulfillment on the quality of what you're contributing at any given point in time. Because you've always got control over what you're contributing, you'll always be secure and you'll always be fulfilled. Which means to say the things that we pursue in our lives, security, fulfillment, power, and harmony, they're all the product of inner work. They sit inside your skin. You don't get these things at work. You take them to it because you manufacture them on the basis of how your intent operates. So what this issue of personal excellence then kind of means from a behavioral point of view is that the individual has some self-awareness. The individual practices mindfulness. In other words, the individual knows how to become present and focus their attention in the moment. The individual knows how to reflect. The individual has learning agility. The individual has emotional intelligence. They're sensitive to other people, and they are prudent. In other words, they know how to do things to do them well. They do things carefully. Finally, the person has a sense of integrity. So, if one took a step back from what we're indicating, then what we're saying, therefore, is that if the core that accounts for the success, it doesn't matter what element you're looking at, is that success is concerned with the intent to give or make or serve or make a contribution. That, in the first instance, is concerned with how you account for the success of whole organizations. Businesses succeed when they add value to customers and clients, that they have a sense of harmony with outside stakeholders when they do that. If one tries to understand what happens inside the business that produces that overall spirit of being there to make a contribution, is that teams, for instance, teams work together in a spirit of harmony. Team members are there to set each other up to succeed rather than to compete with each other. What this means for hierarchy is that leaders are there to care for and grow subordinates. They're there to serve the subordinate rather than get something out of the subordinate. And what that means for the individual concern is that your success as a human being, your sense of fulfillment, your sense of security, indeed your sense of power and harmony with others and with the world, is all the product of the intent to give. Now, if one looks at this model as a Venn diagram, then what becomes apparent is that there are also intersection areas between, for instance, between personal excellence and team excellence. There's an intersection area. So between the team excellence and leadership excellence, and so between personal excellence and leadership excellence. And what occupies those shared spaces, for instance, is what the heart that holds the whole model together is the intent to serve. That sits at the center of the problem. What sits between the issue of personal excellence and team excellence is a phenomenon that we refer to as transactional correctness. And transactional correctness is really about understanding what being here to give means when you deal with somebody else. In other words, what really is the essence of being there to serve others? Because it's not always about being nice. It is about being appropriate with that person. It's about doing what the situation requires of you. What sits between the issue of team excellence and the issue of leadership excellence is a phenomenon that we call benevolent intent. For instance, if you worked for a pharmaceutical factory and you said to the employee, work very hard at making these drugs because you'll make shareholders very rich, the employee will be very upset. But if you said to the employee, work very hard at making these drugs, because if you do, you'll basically help to save millions of lives throughout the world, the person will be very happy. This idea that we're there to make a contribution to the world, that what we do is noble enough to make a sacrifice for, that sits between the issue of team excellence and leadership excellence, because in the first instance, it is clearly up to leaders to articulate this. But secondly, if a team really buys into the benevolent intent of the enterprise, they can, in a sense, run independently of how they led. This idea of what is worth making a sacrifice for can happen over and above how the group is led. And then finally, what sits between the issue of personal excellence and the issue of leadership excellence is the issue of accountability. The more mature people are, the more accountable they become. And the critical variable you're trying to develop with leadership is you're trying to care for and grow people, which means you're trying to cultivate accountable people. So just to summarize this whole approach to leadership is based on the core insight that when people are there to take, they destroy themselves and the world around them. When people are there to give, they first of all become fundamentally fulfilled and secure. They secondly develop relationships of harmony with others, with peers. They thirdly become powerful leaders because they are there to care for and grow their subordinates. And this group of people then will orientate itself to its market and to its world as being there to give rather than take. Thank you very much.